Hello, YouTube. A major feminist talking point is the wage gap. And whenever that topic comes up, women working in STEM fields is often brought into the conversation. The general argument goes along the lines of opponents to feminism saying that most women simply don't want to work in STEM fields, while feminists claim that women are socialized away from working in STEM fields and are not welcome there even if they do pursue such a career. Now, my own opinion on this lies somewhere in between, although I'd say it's closer to the anti-feminist position than the feminist one. In any case, I have come across an article written by a woman in STEM that will allow me to look into the idea of women not being welcomed in these fields. I will read the first part of you verbatim with commentary and text below, but I will provide more in-depth commentary in the second part when she begins to give examples. One thing before I start though, I will give a bit of information about the author. Her name is Clarice Schneider, and she is a Canadian software engineer who has actually never worked in a position above the intern level, but has had a variety of positions, including a brief stint at Facebook. It should be noted that none of her online profiles identify her as a feminist. And all of that information and more was readily available on her public profiles, so I'm not doing any doxing or anything here. She literally posted her resume on a link in her Twitter profile. So now that we know who's writing, let's see what she has to say. An open letter to first years. Today, an upper year told me that he overheard something that members of your class were discussing in the big lab. He said you'd been discussing JobMine and who had gotten which interviews. And when someone mentioned that one of your female classmates had gotten a particular interview, one of you said, "Well, she got it because she's a girl." To the people who have said this, and trust me, I know quite well that there were more than a few of you, you know who you are. To the people who have thought it but not said it out loud, this post is for you too. I am disappointed in you. I don't consider myself a particularly outstanding software engineer by any means, but I'm very good at what I do, foster an intuition that helps me adapt to situations quickly, and have a personality that makes me easy to collaborate and work with. With hard work, panicked late-night interview practice, hours spent on resumes and projects to fill them, and throwing myself into every co-op that I've had, I've been very successful in this field. I've worked with a startup, done a co-op in San Francisco, and spent the last 3 co-ops of my school career with big tech companies, Facebook and Google, working on high-impact user-facing projects. And every single co-op cycle so far, I've been accused of getting a job or interview because of my gender. I'm sure you meant no harm. In your mind, it all measures up. There's no way she could have gotten the interview over you since you clearly had the experience. Or at least someone else more qualified should have gotten it. You didn't mean to hurt anyone's feelings. You're just stating facts. But the fact of the matter is, there is no magic quota that companies have to meet. No company would be stupid enough to hire engineers that wouldn't be an asset to their company, or interview people they wouldn't consider. They truly aren't that stupid. If there was a quota, I wouldn't be the only girl on orientation day in a room full of 30 engineering men. If there was a trend towards hiring women, I wouldn't have had to wait 5 internships to work with another female engineer. I wouldn't have to write posts like this. If you're trying to justify why someone else got the interview over you, you will supply positive reasons for guys and negative reasons for girls. Just think about it. When was the last time you said that Jim must have got the interview because he's a guy, or good looking, or pads his resume? You search for a technical reason. He had experience, he did a lot of extracurriculars, etc. And supplement that. But when you're talking about your female peers, the easiest reason to find is that she's a girl. You trivialize what she's done. You don't give merit to her skills or her work. You pick what makes you feel best about yourself, justified in your own abilities because her gender gave her a leg up. But what you think gives girls a leg up actually just throws us down a fucking staircase. Let me explain. For a workshop I plan to run, I wrote scenarios for attendees to act out. These are meant to help women practice what to say when they're uncomfortable, or when they feel like they're being told that they don't belong. And the worst thing is that when I was writing scenarios, all I had to do was write what had happened to me in my 4 years in this industry. Every single scenario, which I've listed with fake names at the end of this post, has happened to me personally. Each is small on their own, and many of you will actually read them and think that they aren't a big deal, but each one happens more than once, and they all add up quickly. Can you imagine what it's like to be told at every possible opportunity that you don't deserve to be here? To have your hard work undercut by disgruntled peers? You've all been getting interviews, and I know that feeling when you open JobMine and see that you've gotten one. You're on top of the moon. What if I told you right when you got that interview that you shouldn't have gotten it, that you don't deserve it, that it was a mistake? That is every day for a girl in our program. And you know what? Many of you will disagree, but maybe she does deserve that interview. Because after all that bullshit you say to her face, plus the shit talking you do behind her back, she's still here. Don't become the first in a long list of someone's scenarios. Respect your peers. Grow up. Be the men you think you are. Because the sooner you stop thinking you're better than everyone else, you can finally become the people you aspire to be. Okay, so Clarice has some decent points here. It is in fact a dick move to say to someone's face that they only got their job because of their gender. However, I don't really blame people in tech for having that attitude, given the huge push in recent years to get more women into tech, and the huge criticism the tech industry has faced over its lack of gender diversity. What surprises me is that Clarice doesn't even mention any of this in her article, which to me either means she's not aware of it, and thus doesn't really know the industry well enough to be giving advice to anyone, or she's aware of it and has chosen to disregard it, in which case I question her motives. So let's look at her scenarios. Remember, each one has happened to her and has happened multiple times, at least according to Clarice. First years, Ben and Hannah, are both going for the same iOS job. Even though Ben has iOS experience and Hannah doesn't, she has other experience, she gets the interview. Ben angrily tells her that the only reason she got the interview is because she's a girl, and he deserves the interview much more than Hannah. Well, Ben is a dick, but he might also have a point. A company might have seen two relatively equal candidates and chosen the woman so that they can prove that their company isn't sexist. And you can't pretend there isn't pressure on tech companies to prove that they're not sexist. Emma is ecstatic that she got a big tech company offer. She excitedly tells her friend Alex, who congratulates her, saying, "That's amazing, good for you. Big tech company is great at diversity hires." Alex obviously mistakenly thinks that diversity is a good thing. I mean, if you ask Justin Trudeau, he'll tell you that diversity for diversity's sake is a great thing, and openly telling women that their gender played a role in their being hired is just fine and doesn't belittle them at all. I'm assuming Alex is Canadian, just like you, Clarice, so he's probably having a hard time figuring out what he's supposed to believe with regards to diversity hires. Fiona is walking with her friends. Nick is talking about how he just attended a research conference and was talking to a girl who was way too attractive to be in CS. Noticing patterns is not sexist. If it is extremely rare for an attractive girl to be in CS, then it's perfectly normal to comment on an attractive girl being in CS. Just as it would be normal to comment on a black person being in a field that usually doesn't have black people, or to comment on someone being unusually short for a stormtrooper. Now, that being said, if Fiona herself is a girl in CS, then Nick is being kind of insulting by suggesting that she isn't attractive or as attractive as this girl. Kind of insensitive by Nick, but still, it's just noticing patterns. Claire is out for drinks with a group of acquaintances, who all happen to be male. One says that all women are 10s with the lights off, and starts a round of jokes including, "Don't worry about dating tall women, because they're all short lying down." It seems like Claire has achieved acceptance as one of the guys. Good for her. These men clearly feel comfortable enough around her to not alter their behavior just because she's there. What do you expect? Should any group of men you join suddenly change their behavior around you? Should everyone adapt to you? I have to wonder if that behavior would be considered sexist. And it's also a pretty entitled attitude to expect an entire group of people to completely change their behavior just because you're there. I mean, if you say something and say, "Oh, these jokes, aren't funny. Like these jokes really bother me," and they keep making them, then yeah, they're jerks. But if you don't say anything, they're never going to know. Lisa is the only girl on her team at work, and her 30-year-old single male coworker is very nice to her. She considers them good friends. But later on in the term, he starts to make excuses to touch her hand or shoulder during team lunches, or when hanging out in the micro kitchens. She's a bit uncomfortable, but doesn't know if it's a big enough deal to bring to HR, and she doesn't want him to get in trouble. It sounds like the single male coworker may be trying to initiate a romantic relationship and is signaling his interest. I know how horrible it is to be an attractive woman. Men just can't help but be attracted to you. Poor you. So, the correct thing to do in such a case is to be an adult and tell him or otherwise make it clear that you're not interested in him in that way. If he still continues the same behavior after being clearly told to stop, then it becomes a big enough deal to bring to HR. Until then, it's a single guy who seems like is attracted to, I'm guessing, a single woman. Sorry, but is that really a horrible thing? Sadie is working on a Scribbler robot group project and is excited to learn Python. However, her all-male group mates seem to have divided the coding up amongst themselves and left her with the report. Sounds like Sadie needs to learn the skill of speaking up for herself. That's a valuable lesson she hopefully learned, and if she continues to act the same way, she can expect to be left out of a lot of group decisions in the future. I hope, though, that Sadie realizes this is a skill that many men struggle with as well. Riley, who has a gender-neutral name, is going into an interview with Big Tech Company. She's very proud of her resume, which she spent a lot of time on and used to improve her design skills. When she walks in, the interviewer shakes her head and compliments her on her resume. She says, "Thanks, I had a lot of fun making it." The interviewer replies, "I can tell. It's quite pretty. That's how I could tell you were a girl." First off, I thought all of this happened to you, Clarice. I ask because Clarice is certainly not a gender-neutral name. This leads me to think that either this is a made-up scenario, or we're getting a second-hand story here. In any case, maybe you haven't noticed, but when a resume can be described as pretty, the odds are quite high it was made by a girl. Men don't tend to make pretty resumes. They might make well-designed, or even, dare I say, beautiful resumes, that there's flowery, flowing writing or pastel colors. Beyond that, someone who works in a position where they see thousands of resumes would probably be able to tell a lot about a person by the resume, including their gender. Amanda is the female lead in Engplay, with a romantic subplot. Throughout the last performance, the audience is yelling more sexual obscenities and suggestions than for any of her fellow cast members, but she doesn't want to stop the performance just because she's uncomfortable. So I actually had to look up what the heck Eng play is. Luckily, there's a handy link on Clarice's website. It was a student play performed in 2013, billed as Standardized Testing the Musical. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find much more information about the play because I think it's highly unlikely that an audience of a play would yell sexual obscenities and suggestions unless there was a reason to do so relevant to what was happening in the play. Could it be that Clarice was playing a particularly sexually suggesting character? Maybe. We don't know. Normally, I'd give her the benefit of the doubt, but she's already lied about all these scenarios happening to her and them happening multiple times. Lara is dressed up in a onesie for a themed class party, with a zipper up the front. Throughout the party, the guys at the party keep pulling down the zipper to her belly button. Thankfully, she wore a tank top, but is getting really uncomfortable with the behavior. Lara, like Sadie before her, needs to learn to speak up for herself. I know if someone was messing with my costume and I wanted them to stop, I'd do something like jokingly threaten to do something horrific to them if they did it again. And if they still did it, I'd tell them to stop in a more serious tone. Now that being said, unless there was a costume-specific reason for it, pulling down the zipper seems like a kind of douchey thing to keep doing. Lara probably needs better friends. Rachel is discussing how she thinks a TA marked her assignment unfairly. An upper year tries to suggest, helpfully, you could always go and talk to him about it. If you bat your eyelashes and say please, he'll probably change it. So good advice is bad, or something. Clarice, are you denying that a pretty girl batting her eyelashes at a male TA is not a good strategy? I mean, I know it's a rather slimy thing to do, but let's face it, women do it all the time with great success. That being said, I assume this wasn't even a serious suggestion, but was rather meant as a joke. Obviously, though, Rachel didn't get it. Sara is working on a front end at big tech company, and is killing it in her first week. She mentions to the other interns, all male by coincidence, that she submitted 12 change lists in her first week, and the other interns seem surprised and impressed. As she wants to not appear to be bragging, she says, "Oh, they were all UI changes though, smaller changes." The other interns seem less surprised now, saying, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. Front end is so easy." So let's break this down. Sara tells her coworkers about an accomplishment and they are impressed. She then intentionally downplays her achievement and they are now less impressed. And this is somehow a gendered problem. No, Clarice, this is a symptom of someone being overly self-depreciating. You get back from the world what you put out. You can't be overly humble and then expect praise. If you bash yourself, don't be surprised when other people do it too. This is not something that happens only to women. Jessica has noticed in over the past month that none of her male coworkers in their 20s will meet her eye when talking to her, and avoid talking to her at all if they can help it. She's quite lonely at work, and there seems to be nobody else in the 50-person office who wants to talk to her other than the lady at the front desk. Jessica is probably doing something wrong, or has done something wrong. Maybe Jessica has complained one too many times about something being gender-based when it's not. See, when everyone else is avoiding you, it's likely not a problem with them, it's likely a problem with you. Heather has already explained to 5 people in her first week at work that she's not in marketing or design, she's a software engineer. She really wants to come up with a one-liner that will end the questions once and for all. Oh, the woes of not being a stereotype. You know what will end the question? Working somewhere long enough that people start recognizing you. I'm sorry Heather doesn't seem to know this, but there simply aren't very many female software engineers, and those who are probably tend to look or dress a certain way. So for whatever reason, Heather doesn't strike people as a software engineer, so she's going to have to deal with people thinking she works in some other department. Oh, the horror. Rebecca is being sent by plane on an all-expense-paid trip to the corporate office in California for a Women Tech Makers conference, and is really excited. one of her teammates is obviously disgruntled, saying, "I don't see how this is relevant to your job." So, Rebecca is getting special treatment and privileges purely because of her gender, and one of her male teammates is bothered by this. And the problem, as far as Clarice is concerned, is that the teammate is bothered. I mean, this teammate is unlikely to ever get an all-expense-paid trip anywhere unless they earn it through exceptional ability or achievement. But he's not allowed to be bothered when someone else is getting a trip just because they happen to be a woman. And right here, Clarice, is a perfect example of why people assume you're getting jobs just because you're a woman. Because you've got an all-expense-paid trip just because you're a woman. And to top it off, given that this is supposedly happening to you, this trip was given to an intern. I cannot fathom an intern being given an all-expense-paid trip unless they won it in a raffle or something. I have to think that that would be an awful move for any company, because it would be bound to breed discontent among the more senior permanent staff members who have never been given an all-expense-paid trip for anything. And to top it off, you're getting the trip not because you did anything special, but because you're a woman? Your teammate has every reason to be pissed. And to top it off, he's probably going to have to do your work for you while you're off in California enjoying your free trip. Etc. No, please, go on. No? Okay, well, this is how she ends the article. Not exactly stellar writing technique. In any case, most of these stories seem to be perfectly reasonable reactions. This overall says more about what life is like for a timid person who doesn't speak up for themselves than it does for women in tech in general. Sorry, but being timid is going to be a disadvantage in many areas of life, but especially in a competitive, male-dominated field. Clarice here has two options. She can change her behavior and start speaking up for herself and endeavor to make herself more well-liked, or she can keep doing what she's doing, keep getting these negative reactions, and then complain about them online. Honestly, if I were a potential employer reading this, I'd be wary about hiring her. Especially concerning is that example of everyone in the office avoiding her. I, for one, don't want to hire someone like that, especially given that it's happened to her more than once. Or has it? That's actually what bothers me most about this post. The obvious lies that these things all happened to her, and that they all happened more than once. If being a woman in tech was really so difficult and so terrible, there would be no need to lie to make things seem worse than they actually are. Because if this is just a collection of stories about Clarice and her friends, and they all happened only once, then this really doesn't seem too bad at all. Everyone who has ever worked has horror stories. I know I have much worse ones than these, and I'm sure most other people do too. To me, this article was nothing more than the whining of a privileged suburban girl who has been convinced that things are hard for women in tech. So she's actively looking for examples of that. And someone who thinks her handful of years working as an intern has given her an insight into what things are really like for women in tech. Well, sorry, Clarice, but I'm not buying it. But I still do wish you all the best. See you guys.